And recharge here for a second. So really excited to talk with everyone here today about really this topic in terms of bridging sites and sponsors. Obviously a key one that many groups have been thinking about, and really particularly taking a laser focus around the site regulatory need and challenge, one that has been a persistent challenge for many sponsors and CROs to ensure site audit readiness, completeness of this site regulatory file or ISF, and PI oversight, right? Some big ongoing challenges that a lot of sponsors and CROs have really had, right? And so got a great intro here, so I won't really jump into too much here on my background. Really, otherwise to say, from coming from this world, working at a site directly involved in the clinical research side, I saw this site regulatory challenge here directly, right, in the world that I was facing here. And to paint this picture here for a second about, why this is such a big challenge today. And so current state, site regulatory is a big challenge for sponsors and CROs. Ultimately, you're relying on the site to be able to maintain this documentation. Many times, a vast majority of sites today are still using physical paper binders, shared drives, hybrid systems, and so forth to store all of these different documents. And really what I saw was this challenge was around with so much detailed, constantly updating information, coming back and forth with the site. Really massive challenges around being able to maintain all of this information to ensure completeness, to ensure PI oversight, that nothing was missed. And at the end of the day, everything was also being collected and taken back for what you need as a sponsor or CRO, ultimately into a TMF or other location, right? And the real challenge, especially now, is the disruption of these traditional monitor visits, where this site regulatory work, review and collection typically happened, right? Typically very, well-defined, monthly in-person visits. And the last piece, or maybe the first piece, was to go and to be able to actually review everything here in this regulatory binder, right? And obviously that's gone out the window, both with things like real-time access to data and risk-based monitoring, focusing on which sites to be able to visit, as well as obviously the disruption of on-site work here with these sites. And so really the other big challenge here that I really saw here, and just to talk about in some more detail is, and this is from survey results here, over 160 leading ClinOps and quality professionals really identifying this challenge that exists today around site regulatory and consistently having these audit readiness, PI oversight, completeness findings, right, that are continually coming up. And the big challenge here, to go a little bit deeper, right, is really that with so much of that detailed work and needing to rely on the site, go back and forth with them to make sure that everything is here, the information, even the best, most detail-oriented CRA, right, with the best overview in terms of SOPs, in terms of Excel sheets to track this information, in terms of detailed breakdowns of binders or formats, right, that you're providing out to the site, right? Even with all of those things, the best CRAs are still running into issues and challenges being able to actually ensure that all of this is done correctly from a site regulatory standpoint, and really missing these key issues that come up. There's a lot of information that needs to go back and forth with the site. It's relying on the site ultimately to make sure that this is completed and done correctly, right? And I think one of the other, really major challenges that have come into this is we talked about that disruption of these traditional visits. And this was actually done at the end of last year, right? Pre-COVID standpoint and world. And even within that world, right, a majority of, really, there wasn't a single respondent here at this presentation that had, right, that ensured that they actually were consistently reviewing the site regulatory documentation. Many times this would get pushed to the end of the study and the closeout for that site. and there'd be issues found. There's unanticipated change orders and additional work that comes up. There's delays to the site closeout, to database lock, to the TMF, and ultimately submission here as well too. And as I mentioned, especially today, when these traditional visits have really been completely disrupted, right, due to the risk-based focus of these monitoring visits, due to the remote world that we live in today, there's even more risk that this work really isn't happening consistently. We're hearing from a lot of sponsors and CROs that want to COVID-proof their trial, not just in terms of being able to access this information, but really to make sure that the site is audit ready. If an inspection and audit were to happen, that they would have no or minimal findings, right? That the PI is being able to show oversight of these processes that are really critical. That the site regulatory file is complete first, and secondly, that you can collect the key information that you also need, right, for a TMF or into another system. And again, I think as we step back here, right, the main challenge is that there's just so much of this work. There's so much documentation. You need to be going back and forth with the site, again, the most detail-oriented CRA in person out there with the biggest Excel sheet of where to track every credential and approval and one-off recruitment and ad that went through at that site. Did they have every approval associated with that, and all of that documented, audit ready, in a location that's ready to go? These are really a lot of the key challenges here, right? And so, really to share with you a learned secret now, from doing this here for now on 8 years, right? This learned secret is the only way to actually achieve the level of site audit readiness that's needed, and ultimately also improve those downstream TMF inspection readiness issues that come up, is to really be able to enforce your way as a sponsor, as a CRO, your purpose-built site regulatory workflows for that detailed work that the CRA needs to do to identify what's missing and what needs to be done. For the site as well, to be able to work together, to have very clear expectations for what's required, compared to feeling it many times that might be arbitrary preferences, right, of the individual CRA and site for how this work needs to get done. And really in comparison to a different world, right, where many times we're just thinking about how do we get access to the documents, how do we take more document-centered tools, right, that can help, but at the same time still rely on that perfection from the CRA, still relies on their tight schedule to make sure that this site regulatory work is happening and is happening correctly. And to step back here, the attention to detail, the best practices, the detailed SOPs and Excel sheet tools that monitors and CRAs and sponsors and CROs have developed are a critical part of this work so far, right? And insurance today for how it's done. But as I mentioned, even the best, most trained individuals are going to have inevitable error, missing this information, and especially today, not even going to really have the site time with the site to be able to do everything that they need to, right? And as I mentioned, that data before in those graphs, they don't lie, right? They show a clear picture of how this information is consistently getting missed. And more importantly, those individuals, the CRAs and the sites, can be spending much better time, right? Instead of focusing on pushing documents, whether they're electronic or whether they're in paper form and scanning them, right? They can be doing much more with their time today to really impact the site and in the study that they're running, right? Seeing patients, getting new sites up and running here. And so I understand, obviously, within this short format today, we're not going to be able to go through every detail for what this means and what a really purpose-built site regulatory solution and the workflows can look like. And I understand it's a new concept that might not be as readily apparent to to individuals than the tools you may be used to today that are very document-centric, TMF-centric, and so forth, right? But we'd love to be able to have the opportunity to talk with you and talk in some more detail about what that might look like for you and the value that that could bring. Because ultimately, the three key benefits that can be realized here, first and foremost, is that level of site audit readiness. It's a key driver. Another graph that we didn't get to show today was actually 90% of sponsors, surveyed, right? They had responded that site regulatory audit readiness is a significant driver for how they manage their studies, both in-house and selection of the CRO that they work with, right? And so in and of itself, being able to ensure site audit readiness is critical for any study, and particularly today, right, as we're seeing more deviations, more staff changes and issues at sites in terms of how they manage and work within today's setting. And ultimately what that also means, by ensuring that level of site audit readiness, also being able to address the issues that come up when this work isn't consistently done and leads to delays to closeout, delays to database lock and TMF and submission here, right? As well as those unanticipated change orders, audit and inspection findings that can come both from the site, the CRO and the sponsor, right? In terms of them being able to show their level of monitoring and oversight that's required. And ultimately, too, that a large part of what the CRA's job is, right, obviously is highly focused on source documents and source data, but about 20–25% of their time is traditionally spent on this level of site regulatory review and collection.